Newton's three laws of motions, right? Let's summarize Newton's three laws of motions. Law number one, things that are at rest stay at rest. Number two, force equals mass times acceleration. Number three, for every action, there must be an equal reaction, okay? So what people don't understand is these three laws are not physical laws. They are first and foremost an ontological argument, which proves the existence of God. So the first law, things that are at rest must stay at rest. Okay, so we can imagine that at the beginning of time, everything was at rest. If everything's at rest, it can't move by itself, according to the first law. Therefore, something must have moved things to put things in motion. And this is what Aristotle calls the prime mover. Second and third law implies that there's a structure and order and purpose to the universe. And who designed this structure, order, and purpose? It must be God. Okay? So what's interesting is that these three laws of motion, they prove that God exists, but much more importantly, they are the basis for a new religion, a new religious movement called deism. And deism is important because deism is the main religion of the founding fathers of America. Having proven that God in fact does exist, Newton's next step is, what does God want? What is God's purpose? Well, for him, it was easy. To understand God's purpose, read the Bible. So Newton would spend decades reading the Bible and trying to imagine its mathematical underpinnings. For him, every sentence was a mathematical formula. And he was trying to take the Bible and compare and contrast it with history. He wrote a book. It was not published in his lifetime, but it was published after his death. It was called Observations upon the Prophecies of Daniel and the Apocalypse of St. John. So this is a major work, and it's a foundational text for Christian Zionism because it argues, first of all, that history is theological, that God has a purpose. And second of all, this is really important, the Bible is literal, okay? So even though Daniel and John were different people, they both, as prophets, spoke the mind of God. They were divinely inspired, and so whatever they wrote came from God himself. So by examining their prophecies, you are deciphering God's purpose for humanity. Okay? And this is the foundation for Christian Zionism. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to understand about Newton, that he was first and foremost a theologian and not a scientist. Second thing that you must understand about Newton is that he was a member of secret societies in England at that time. Now, today when we think of secret societies, we think of nefarious underground conspiracies. But at that time, secret societies were actually very common and very well accepted. Secret societies were platforms for men of education, of wealth, and of status to get together to engage in religious speculation outside the purview of the Anglican Church. At that time, the Anglican Church had an orthodoxy, and by law, you cannot transgress against this orthodoxy. So, for example, Newton got into a lot of trouble during his lifetime because he did not believe in the Holy Trinity. He thought that Jesus was not co-equal to God. He thought that Jesus was subordinate to God, and this was a heresy at that time. So Newton got in a lot of trouble, but he had powerful friends, powerful backers, and so they bailed him out from the church authorities. So these secret societies were a platform for people to discuss religious matters. They also had their origins from the Knights Templars. The Knight Templars during the Crusades were in Jerusalem, and because they were in Jerusalem, they could engage in world religions like Zoroastrianism, like Islam, like Judaism, like paganism. And as such, and because these were extremely well-educated men with deep intellectual curiosity, they collected all the secret teachings that they were exposed to in Jerusalem, and they brought it back to them in Europe. And so they ran afoul of the Catholic Church, which outlawed them eventually. But their teachings went underground and they became embedded in these secret societies. So when Newton joined these secret societies, and when he was able to discover the laws of the universe, well, I imagine that these men celebrate Newton as a prophet. as a Messiah, as a chosen one, as someone who would reveal the secret teachings of God to the world. And because the world was not ready for these teachings, then they would make it their mission to keep it secret and wait for the day when they could reveal these teachings to the world. So Newton's teachings that God has a purpose, and this purpose is literally embedded into the Bible, and this purpose will lead to the second coming of Christ. It now becomes the framework for these secret societies. And as they spread to America, it becomes embedded in the secret societies of America as well. And guess who are members of these secret societies? The founding fathers of America, right? That's something you need to know about Newton, that he was a member of these secret societies who celebrated him and who treated his theological understandings as the Word of God. And the third thing that you have to understand about Newton is for 30 years, he was master of the Royal Mint. And his purpose was to maintain the sanctity, the value, and the credibility of royal coinage against counterfeiters. And so to deal with counterfeiters, he set up a network of spies to identify these counterfeiters, sometimes to torture them for information, and for the most egregious offenders, they would be executed. Okay? So in other words, Newton established England's very first intelligence agency, intelligence apparatus. In 1865, the United States Treasury Department established a secret service. What's their job? The job was to identify counterfeiters. Why were they called the Secret Service? Because the Treasury Department didn't want people to know they existed. Because if they existed, it meant that counterfeiting was a huge problem in America, which it was at that time, which it still is today. And so that would undermine the credibility of the currency, okay? So Newton had his own intelligence agency. So in many ways, Newton built the foundations of the British Empire, which eventually became the Anglo-American Empire, which controls the world today. And so let's summarize, and I'll give you 3 takeaways from today's talk I want you to remember, okay? The first takeaway is, because Isaac Newton saw himself as a prophet, because he was convinced that only through divine favor could he arise from being a poor, abandoned child to becoming one of the leading intellectuals of British society, the leading scientist of British society. It could only be through divine favor. Then he had a mission to spread God's message. And that message will become the foundations of Christian Zionism. So Christian Zionism is embedded into the very fabric, the very foundation of the Anglo-American Empire. Okay, that's the first major takeaway. Second major takeaway is Israel is a creation of the Anglo-American Empire. Zionism is a creation of Christian Zionism, which leads us to the third takeaway. Judaism and Zionism are not the same thing. Christian Zionism and Judaism are in fundamental conflict. Let me explain why. The people who are most opposed to the creation of the state of Israel are Orthodox Jews. Because in their tradition, in their religion, the plan is for God to send a Messiah, the anointed one, who will lead the Jewish people. And this Messiah will bring the Jews back to the promised land, create the nation of Israel, build the third temple, and create the Messianic age. The Jews don't know who this Messiah is, and they don't know when he will come, and so they must be patient, have faith in God. Christian Zionism is an attempt to manipulate history, manipulate God, to force the second coming of Jesus. In the mind of Christian Zionists, if the nation of Israel is reconstituted, if all the Jews return to Israel, if the third temple is built, if there's a war of Gog and Magog, then Jesus is forced to return. They will force the hand of God and create the Messianic age. So for Orthodox Jews, this is a blasphemy. This is counterfeiting. This is stealing their religion. And that's why Orthodox Jews are most opposed to the state of Israel.